My daughter-in-law just made the biggest mistake of her life. An hour ago, I received a text message that read, "I borrowed your old ring for the party, Grandma. Hope you don't mind." I replied with a smile, "Have fun, dear." But immediately afterward, I dialed my lawyer, Frank Miller, and told him, "File a report for the theft of inventory item 847, a $3 million pink diamond ring." An hour later, the police raided that elegant party where Cynthia was flaunting my ring, believing she had taken a worthless trinket. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story is going to leave you speechless. My name is Dolores. I am 71 years old, and for the past 10 years, I've been treated like the invisible mother-in-law, the old lady who gets in the way at family gatherings. To Cynthia, I was nothing more than an annoying old woman living in the house my late husband left me. She joined our family a decade ago when she married my son Louis, and from day one, she made me feel like an intruder in my own home. Cynthia is one of those women who believe the world owes them everything. Elegant, manipulative, always dressed in the finest red and green gowns, adorned with expensive jewelry that my son bought her to keep her happy. From the moment she stepped into my home, she began treating me as if I were her personal maid. "Dolores, make me a coffee. Dolores, iron my black dress for tonight. Dolores, don't make noise when you walk. My head hurts." She never addressed me with respect. To her, I was simply the old lady, as if I didn't even have a name. At family dinners, she would talk about me as if I weren't present. "Louis, your mother should consider moving to a retirement home. This house is too big for someone her age." And my son, my own son, would just lower his head and mumble, "Mom is fine here, Cynthia." But I knew things were changing. Louis began to look at me differently, as if I were a burden. Cynthia had slowly poisoned his mind, whispering in his ear that I was too old to care for such a large house, that they needed the space for their own plans. She had grand dreams, to turn my living room into her personal office, to transform the garden my husband and I had cultivated for 40 years into a modern entertainment area. For years, I endured her humiliations in silence. When guests arrived, Cynthia would introduce me as Louis's mother, never as the owner of the house. When she hosted parties, I had to hide in my room because, according to her, old people make others uncomfortable. There were nights I cried in silence, wondering how I had become invisible in the home I built with so much love. What Cynthia never knew, what no one in my family knew, was that my late husband, Mario, left me much more than this house. During our last years together, Mario had been secretly collecting valuable art, jewelry, and antiques. He knew I was discreet, that I never flaunted wealth, and he trusted that I would know how to handle his legacy when the time came. In a secret safe hidden behind a painting in my bedroom, he kept a collection worth over $15 million. Among those pieces was the ring Cynthia had just borrowed, a 5-carat pink diamond ring designed by a French jeweler in 1920, valued at $3 million. To anyone unfamiliar with jewelry, it might have looked like a simply elegant antique ring, but to experts, it was a masterpiece. Today, Cynthia had an important charity gala, one of those elegant gatherings where business wives display their finest attire and compete to see who has the most impressive jewels. For weeks, I had heard her complain that she didn't have the perfect accessory for her golden dress. She had been poring over jewelry catalogs, sighing because the pieces she liked cost too much, even for the generous budget Louis gave her. This morning, as I watered the garden plants, I saw her enter my room without permission. It wasn't the first time she had snooped through my things, but this time was different. I watched her open my jewelry box, that small wooden chest where I keep some less valuable pieces, and her eyes landed on the pink diamond ring. She took it, examined it against the light, and I saw that disdainful smile she always wore when she believed she had found something she could use. An hour later, I received that text message. "I borrowed your old ring for the party, Grandma. Hope you don't mind." She didn't even have the courtesy to ask for my permission first. She just took it, assuming everything of mine was at her disposal, that I was too old and insignificant to possess anything of real value. When I read that message, something inside me changed. For 10 years, I had endured her humiliations, her contempt, her cruel remarks about my age and my supposed uselessness. But taking my ring without permission, that ring, which represented one of the most valuable pieces in Mario's secret collection, was the last straw. I sat in my garden chair, looking at the message on my phone, and for the first time in years, I genuinely smiled. "Have fun, dear," I replied, but immediately afterward, I dialed Frank, my trusted lawyer. Frank had been Mario's best friend, the only one who knew the full truth about our hidden fortune. "Frank," I said with a voice firmer than I had used in years, "it's time to activate the protocol you and Mario designed. Cynthia just stole inventory item 847. There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then I heard Frank's laugh. "Dolores, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we put this in motion, there will be no turning back." I confirmed that yes, after a decade of humiliations, it was time for my daughter-in-law to learn exactly who she was dealing with. Frank explained the plan. For years, he had been documenting each piece of Mario's collection, officially registering them as high-value items with specific inventory numbers. Each piece had certificates of authenticity, updated appraisals, and most importantly, full insurance coverage. The ring Cynthia had taken was legally registered as item 847, valued at $3 million. "I'm going to call the insurance company immediately," Frank told me. "The protocol states that when a registered piece is taken without the owner's authorization, we must report it as theft immediately. In 30 minutes, the police will have a warrant to recover the stolen property, no matter where it is." While Frank made the necessary calls, I sat in my living room and recalled all the times Cynthia had made me feel invisible. The time she hosted a dinner for Louis's business partners and told me to eat in the kitchen because there wasn't enough space in the dining room. Last Christmas, when she opened expensive gifts Louis had bought her and then handed me a cheap scarf saying, "We got you something simple because at your age, you don't need many things anymore." I remembered the day her friends came over for a book club meeting. I was reading in my favorite armchair in the living room when she came in and told me in front of everyone, "Dolores, could you go to your room? We need privacy to talk about important things." Her friends looked at me with pity, as if I were an old pet that needed to be moved out of the way. But what hurt me most to remember was the conversation I had overheard last week. Cynthia was talking on the phone with her sister Gretchen, and I could hear everything from the hallway. "I swear this old woman is driving me crazy," she said. "She lives in this huge house like a queen, but look at how she dresses. Look at her cheap jewelry. It's pathetic. Louis and I are waiting for her to decide to move to a retirement home, but she's too stubborn. When she finally leaves, I'm going to renovate this entire house, starting by throwing all her ugly antiques in the trash." That conversation had been the moment I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. Cynthia not only despised me, she also despised everything Mario and I had built together. She had no idea that those ugly antiques she hated so much were worth more money than she could earn in several lifetimes. Frank called me back. "Everything's ready, Dolores. The theft report has been officially filed. The ring is listed as stolen property valued at $3 million. I gave the police the address of the hotel where the charity gala is being held. They have orders to recover the stolen property immediately." "And what will happen to Cynthia?" I asked. Frank sighed. "Dolores, technically, she has committed grand larceny. We're talking about $3 million. According to the law, she could face several years in prison, but you are the victim, so you can decide if you want to press criminal charges or simply recover your property." I told him I wanted to think about it. For now, I just wanted to see Cynthia's face when she realized she had completely underestimated the useless old lady she despised so much. An hour after I filed the report, my phone rang. It was Louis, and he sounded absolutely panicked. "Mom, what's going on? The police just raided Cynthia's party. They say she stole a $3 million ring. This has to be a terrible mistake." "It's not a mistake, son," I replied calmly. "Your wife took a very valuable piece from your father's collection without permission. That ring is worth exactly $3 million, and she had no right to take it." "What collection? What are you talking about? Dad never had anything worth $3 million. Mom, you have to call the police and tell them it was a misunderstanding. It was unbelievable. My own son didn't even know the truth about the fortune his father had accumulated. Mario had been very careful to keep his investments and collections secret, even from Louis. He wanted to protect our family from the dangers that come with visible wealth, kidnappers, con artists, distant relatives who appear asking for money. Louis, I said, there are many things you don't know about your father and about me. Your wife has just made a very serious mistake, and she will face the consequences alone. Mom, have you gone crazy? Cynthia is crying. They're treating her like a criminal. Her friends are recording everything with their phones. Her reputation is ruined. Her reputation, I repeated. What about the 10 years I've endured her treating me like trash in my own home? What about all the time she humiliated me in front of people? What about that conversation where she told her sister I was pathetic? Louis fell silent. He knew exactly what conversation I was talking about because he had heard it too and had done nothing to defend me. Mom, please, he finally mumbled. Cynthia can be difficult sometimes, but she doesn't deserve to go to jail for a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Louis. It was theft. And now your wife is going to learn that the woman she despised so much is not the helpless old lady she thought. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, processing what had just happened. My son, my own son, had spent 10 years watching his wife humiliate me and had never raised his voice to defend me. Now that the consequences had arrived, he wanted me to be the one to save Cynthia from her own arrogance. But I wasn't going to do it. For the first time in a decade, I wasn't going to be the invisible woman who endured everything in silence. 20 minutes later, Frank arrived at my house accompanied by Patrick, a private detective he had worked with for years. Patrick was a man in his 50s, elegant and professional, specializing in fraud and art theft cases. Dolores, Frank told me, Patrick has been discreetly investigating Cynthia for the past 6 months, ever since you mentioned your suspicion about her activities. I was surprised. What suspicions? I never told you I suspected Cynthia. Frank smiled. Do you remember the conversation we had in December when you mentioned that some of your small pieces had been moved and that you had noticed your jewelry box had been moved several times? Yes, I remembered. I had thought it was my imagination, the forgetfulness of old age. Those weren't oversights, Dolores. I decided to investigate discreetly, and what Patrick discovered goes far beyond today's ring. Patrick opened a folder full of photographs and documents. Mrs. Dolores, your daughter-in-law has been selling pieces from your collection for almost 2 years. Small things at first, antique brooches, pearl earrings, a silver necklace, things you might have thought you had lost or put elsewhere. My heart raced. We have documented at least 12 different sales at pawn shops and antique stores in the city. The total value of what she has sold amounts to approximately $45,000. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Cynthia not only humiliated me and treated me as if I were invisible, she had also been stealing from me for years. But how? How did she know which pieces to take without me realizing it? She's clever, Patrick continued. She only took pieces that you rarely wore or that were stored at the bottom of your drawers. Apparently, she had been mentally cataloging all your jewelry for years, identifying which ones she could take without you immediately noticing their absence. Furthermore, we have evidence that she has been taking photographs of all your valuable belongings, probably to assess what else she could sell in the future. Frank added, Patrick has recordings of Cynthia at 3 different pawn shops, where she clearly lies about the origin of the jewelry. In one recording, she says they are heirlooms from her deceased grandmother. In another, she claims her husband gave them to her, but that she needs quick cash for a medical emergency. I felt a mixture of fury and betrayal I had never experienced before. For 2 years, while I felt guilty for losing my things, while I thought my memory was failing me, Cynthia had been systematically stealing from me and then lying to sell my belongings. Worse still, she had been planning to steal from me more extensively, secretly photographing my collection. There's more, said Patrick, turning to the next page of the file. Her spending patterns do not match the income she and your son officially have. In the last 2 years, Cynthia has bought over $30,000 worth of clothing, paid for expensive treatments, luxurious vacations, and has been frequenting high-end restaurants. When we confronted these expenses with the money we know she obtained by selling your jewelry, the numbers match perfectly. So the money Cynthia had used to buy all those elegant red and green dresses, those designer handbags with which she looked at me with superiority, those expensive shoes she used to trample my self-esteem, it had all come from the sale of my belongings. She had been funding her luxurious lifestyle by stealing from me, the useless old woman she despised so much. But wait, I said, if you knew all this for months, why didn't you tell me anything? Frank exchanged a look with Patrick. Dolores, we needed enough evidence to build a solid case. Also, we wanted to wait until she made a mistake big enough that she couldn't deny it or manipulate the situation. Today's theft of the $3 million ring is exactly that mistake. At that moment, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but I answered. Mrs. Dolores? It was a woman's voice I didn't recognize. She sounded nervous. This is Detective Margaret Garcia from the Metropolitan Police. We're at the Plaza Hotel with your daughter-in-law, Cynthia. She's insisting that you gave her permission to take the ring and that this is all a misunderstanding. Could you come to the hotel to clarify the situation? Detective Garcia, I replied. My daughter-in-law took that ring without my permission. I have the text message where she herself admits she borrowed it without asking for prior authorization. Furthermore, that ring is valued at $3 million and is part of a legally registered collection. I understand, ma'am, but your daughter-in-law is very upset, and your son is also here, insisting there must be some misunderstanding. He says you've never owned such valuable jewelry and that there's probably an error in the appraisal. I laughed, a laugh that surprised even Frank and Patrick. Detective, my son is saying I couldn't possibly have valuable jewelry because I'm too poor or too foolish to possess such a thing? There was an awkward silence on the other end of the line. Well, ma'am, he did mention that you live on a modest pension and had never shown signs of that kind of wealth. Detective Garcia, I'll be there in an hour, and I'll bring my lawyer and all the documents that prove not only that the ring is mine, but also that my daughter-in-law has been stealing from me for years. I expect that when I arrive, she will be in police custody, as befits a thief who has stolen property valued at over $3 million. After hanging up, I looked at Frank and Patrick. Gentlemen, it's time for Cynthia and my son to learn exactly who they've been dealing with all these years. Frank smiled. Dolores, is there anything else I should know before we go to the hotel? Patrick discovered that Cynthia has been talking to an art appraiser named Mark, showing him photographs of several pieces from your collection. Apparently, she was planning a much larger theft. According to our recordings, she believed she could sell several of your paintings and sculptures for at least $200,000. Patrick added, Mrs. Dolores, your daughter-in-law not only sees you as a useless old woman, she sees you as a source of income she can exploit without consequences. In her own recorded words during a phone conversation with that appraiser, she said, The old lady doesn't even know what she has. I could steal half her stuff and she'd never realize it. She's too senile to keep an inventory of her belongings. Those words were like a slap in the face. Cynthia had not only been stealing from me, she had been laughing at me, considering me too stupid and useless to realize her crimes. She had been planning to rob me massively, taking advantage of what she perceived as my senility. Frank, I said, getting up from my chair with a determination I hadn't felt in years, I want you to press every possible charge against Cynthia, not only for today's ring, but for all the thefts over the past 2 years. And I want my son, Louis, to know exactly what kind of woman he chose as his wife. Are you absolutely sure, Dolores? Once we make this public, the entire family will know the truth about Mario's fortune and about Cynthia's crimes. There will be no way to go back. I looked out the window at the garden Mario and I had cultivated for 40 years, the garden Cynthia wanted to destroy to be her modern entertainment area. I thought of all the humiliations I had endured, all the times I had felt invisible in my own home, all the nights I had cried, wondering if I really was as useless as Cynthia made me feel. "Frank," I said, "it's time for this senile old woman to teach them a lesson they will never forget." When we arrived at the Plaza Hotel, the scene was exactly as I had imagined. There were at least 5 police cruisers at the entrance, local reporters who had arrived drawn by the drama, and groups of charity gala guests leaving the hotel, whispering and pointing. This was the kind of scandal that our city's high society would remember for years. As I entered the lobby, I immediately saw Cynthia. She was sitting on a leather sofa surrounded by 3 police officers, and for the first time in 10 years, she didn't look like the elegant, controlled woman she had always been. Her perfect makeup was streaked with tears. Her golden dress was wrinkled, and her hands were handcuffed in front of her. The ring, my $3 million ring, was no longer on her finger. Louis stood beside her, gesticulating violently as he spoke with a detective. When he saw me enter, accompanied by Frank and Patrick, his expression changed from desperation to something that looked more like fury. He walked quickly toward me, and I could see in his eyes that he blamed me, not his thieving wife, for this entire situation. "Mom, you have to fix this right now," he yelled at me in front of the entire crowded lobby. "Cynthia is being publicly humiliated because of you. Her friends are uploading videos to social media. Her reputation is completely ruined." "Her reputation?" I repeated, keeping my voice calm even though I was trembling with rage inside. "Louis, your wife stole a $3 million ring from me. We're not talking about a misunderstanding over a trinket. We're talking about a serious crime. But Mom, you never told us you had anything so valuable. If we had known, this never would have happened." Cynthia thought it was just some old, worthless ring. Frank stepped forward and handed Louis a thick folder. "Mr. Louis, here are all the documents proving the value of the ring, along with certificates of authenticity and insurance policies. Your wife did not steal a worthless old ring. She stole a historical piece of jewelry valued at $3 million. Louis opened the folder and began to review the documents. I watched as his expression gradually changed from disbelief to complete shock. This can't be real. Dad really had these things? Why did you never tell us anything?" "Because your father knew it was better to keep our wealth private," I explained. "And seeing how your wife has been stealing from me for 2 years, it seems he was right." "Stealing from you for 2 years? What are you talking about?" Patrick stepped forward and showed Louis the complete file on Cynthia, the photographs of her at the pawn shops, the recordings where she lied about the origin of my jewelry, the sales receipts. Everything was there. "Your wife, Mr. Louis, has been systematically selling your mother's belongings for the past 2 years. We have documented thefts totaling $45,000. Louis was speechless as he reviewed the evidence. I could see his world crumbling before his eyes. The woman he had married, the woman for whom he had allowed me to be treated like trash for a decade, was a thief who had been exploiting his own mother. At that moment, Detective Garcia approached us. "Mrs. Dolores, I need you to officially confirm some details. Did you give your daughter-in-law permission to take the ring in question?" "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "I have the text message here where she herself admits she borrowed it without asking my permission. In my world, taking something without permission is called theft." "And can you confirm that the ring legally belongs to you?" Frank intervened. "Detective, here are all the legal documents. The ring was purchased by Mrs. Dolores's late husband in 1975. It is registered in his will, it is insured for its full value, and it is part of the official inventory of the inheritance Mrs. Dolores received." The detective reviewed the documents and nodded. "Everything seems to be in order. Mrs. Dolores, do you wish to press criminal charges against your daughter-in-law?" Before I could answer, Cynthia cried out from her seat. "Dolores, please, it was just a misunderstanding. You know I would never intentionally hurt you. I've always treated you with respect." I turned to her slowly. For the first time in 10 years, Cynthia was speaking to me with desperation instead of contempt. For the first time, she needed me instead of treating me as if I were invisible. Respect? I asked, walking toward where she was sitting. Do you call 10 years of humiliations respect? Do you call telling me to eat in the kitchen when guests arrived respect? Do you call stealing from me for 2 years and then calling me senile respect? Her eyes filled with panic. Steal from you? I never stole anything from you. This is the first time I've taken something of yours. Patrick stepped closer and showed her the photographs of her at the pawn shops. Mrs. Cynthia, we have photographic and video evidence of you selling your mother-in-law's belongings on at least 12 different occasions over the past 2 years. Cynthia's face turned completely pale. She looked at the photographs, then at me, then at Louis, desperately searching for an explanation that could save her. Those were just small pieces that I thought you didn't use anymore, she mumbled. I never thought you'd notice. I thought you had forgotten them. And that gave you the right to steal them? I asked. And to lie in the pawn shops, saying they were heirlooms from your grandmother? Louis looked at her in horror. Cynthia, did you really do that? Did you really steal my mother's things for years? Cynthia began to cry harder. Louis, you know how much we needed the extra money. You know your salary wasn't enough for the lifestyle we wanted, and she has so many things. I thought she would never notice a few small pieces missing. But they weren't yours to take, Louis shouted. They were my mother's, and you made me believe she was losing her memory when she asked about her things. It was then that I realized what had really been happening. Cynthia had not only been stealing from me, she had been manipulating Louis into believing I was developing dementia. Every time I mentioned I couldn't find something, she would whisper to Louis that it was normal for elderly people to lose their things and forget where they had put them. Detective Garcia, I said, feeling a strange and powerful calm, I want to press every possible charge against my daughter-in-law, not only for today's ring, but for all the thefts she has committed over the past 2 years. No, cried Cynthia. Please, Dolores, I can give you everything back. I can compensate you. Don't do this to me. I looked her directly in the eyes. Cynthia, for 10 years you treated me as if I were invisible. You humiliated me in front of guests. You made me feel like a useless burden in my own home. For 2 years, you stole from me while making me believe I was losing my memory. And now that the consequences have arrived, you want me to have mercy on you? But I never thought it was so serious. I never thought you had such valuable things. If I had known I had valuable things, what? Would you have stolen more from me? I let her process that question for a moment. Cynthia, the problem isn't that you didn't know the value of what you stole. The problem is that you stole from me. The problem is that for a decade you treated me like trash. Frank approached the detective. Detective Garcia, we also want to file charges for the other documented thefts. We have enough evidence to prosecute at least 12 additional cases of theft. The detective nodded. Understood. Mrs. Cynthia, you are under arrest for grand larceny in the first degree, multiple counts of petty theft, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective read Cynthia her Miranda rights, I looked at my son Louis. He stood there watching his wife being officially arrested, finally understanding that the woman he had married was a criminal who had been exploiting his own mother for years. Mom, he said in a broken voice, I didn't know any of this. You have to believe me. Louis, I replied, perhaps you didn't know about the thefts, but you did know how Cynthia treated me. You saw every humiliation, every slight, every moment she made me feel invisible in my own home, and you never said anything. Louis lowered his head, unable to look me in the eyes. He knew I was right. For 10 years, he had been a silent witness to his wife, turning me into a stranger in my own home, and he had chosen the easy path to say nothing, not to confront, not to defend his own mother. Now that the truth had come to light, he finally understood the price of his silence. Mom, he mumbled, I thought you two would eventually find a way to get along. I thought if I didn't get involved, things would resolve themselves. Things don't resolve themselves, Louis, I replied, especially when one person is systematically abusing another. Your wife not only disrespected me for a decade, she stole from me, manipulated me, and planned to steal even more. And you thought that would just resolve itself? As I spoke with Louis, I could see that several guests from the charity gala were recording the scene with their phones. The story of the millionaire mother-in-law who caught her thieving daughter-in-law would be circulating on social media before the night was over. For Cynthia, who had built her entire social identity around her image as an elegant and respectable wife, this was worse than jail. Detective Garcia finished reading the Miranda rights and began to escort Cynthia toward the exit. But before they could reach the door, Cynthia turned to me with an expression I had never seen before. Pure, desperate fury. "Dolores, you don't understand what you've just done!" she screamed at me. "My life is ruined, my friends, my reputation, everything is destroyed. And why? For a stupid ring you didn't even wear." "No," I calmly replied. "For 10 years of thefts, humiliations, and mistreatment, today's ring was simply the last straw. But I gave you a family," she continued to scream. "I gave you grandchildren you never had. Louis and I gave you a purpose in your old age." That was the most ridiculous statement I had heard in years. "Cynthia, you didn't give me a family. You turned my family into strangers who treated me as if I were a burden. And as for grandchildren, you two decided not to have children, remember? You said children would ruin your figure and interfere with your career." Louis looked increasingly uncomfortable with every word that came out of his wife's mouth. I think he was finally seeing Cynthia as she really was. Manipulative, selfish, and completely willing to lie when the consequences of her actions finally caught up to her. "Dolores!" Cynthia yelled as the detective tried to make her walk. "If you go through with this, you're going to lose your son forever. Louis will never forgive you for destroying his marriage." I looked at Louis. He stood there, watching his wife make threats while she was being arrested for stealing from his own mother. "Louis," I said, "is that how you feel? Do you think I destroyed your marriage?" Louis remained silent for a long moment, processing everything he had discovered in the last 2 hours. His wife was not the elegant and sophisticated woman he thought he had won over. She was a thief who had been exploiting his elderly mother for years, while manipulating him into believing that his mother's forgetfulness was a sign of senility. "No, Mom," he finally said. "My marriage was destroyed the moment Cynthia decided to steal from you for the first time. I just didn't realize it until now." Cynthia was speechless for the first time. She had been counting on Louis to blame me for her problems, as he had done so many times before. But this time, the evidence was too clear and the lies too obvious. After Cynthia was taken away, Patrick handed me an additional folder. "Mrs. Dolores, there's something else you need to know. During our investigation, we discovered that Cynthia had been in contact with an attorney specializing in wills and inheritances. Apparently, she had been researching legal ways to challenge your father-in-law's will if you were to pass away." Louis looked increasingly sick. "What does that mean?" "It means," Frank explained, "that your wife was not only stealing from his mother in the present. She was planning for the future, investigating how to take over the entire inheritance when his mother died." Patrick added, "We found emails between Cynthia and this lawyer discussing the possibility of declaring your mother mentally incompetent. The plan was to demonstrate that you had senile dementia and therefore lacked the legal capacity to manage your finances or property." My blood ran cold. She was planning to declare me mentally incompetent. "Yes," Patrick continued. "In one of the emails, Cynthia mentions that you had been frequently losing things and that this could be used as evidence of mental decline. Of course, now we know that you weren't losing things. She was stealing them." Louis sat heavily in a lobby chair. "My God," he mumbled. She was planning to steal everything from you." "Not only that," Frank added, "we also found that she had been pressuring Louis to convince you to move to a retirement home. Once you were institutionalized, it would have been much easier to obtain a court order declaring you mentally incompetent." I remembered all the conversations where Cynthia subtly suggested that I was too old to live alone, that I needed professional care, that I would be happier in a place designed for people my age. It wasn't genuine concern. It was a calculated strategy to seize my fortune. "Mrs. Dolores," Patrick said, Your daughter-in-law is much more dangerous than we initially thought. We're not talking about a woman who impulsively took some jewelry. We're talking about someone who had developed a long-term plan to steal your entire inheritance and declare you mentally incompetent to legally justify it." Louis lifted his head and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I never suspected any of this. When Cynthia mentioned the retirement home, I thought it was because she genuinely cared about your well-being." "Louis," I said, sitting next to him, "your wife manipulated you as much as she manipulated me. She knew exactly what to say to make you believe her intentions were good." Frank closed his folder and looked at me seriously. "Dolores, with all this evidence, the district attorney is probably going to offer Cynthia a plea bargain. Depending on how we handle this, she could face between 5 and 15 years in prison." "And what about the money she already stole?" I asked. "Most of the pieces she sold were bought by private collectors," Patrick explained. "We're going to be able to track down and recover approximately 60% of the stolen value. The rest was probably already spent on her lavish lifestyle." Louis sighed deeply. "Mom, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen to me? What's going to happen to our family?" It was a good question. In the space of 2 hours, my family had been completely transformed. My daughter-in-law was arrested and facing years in prison. My son finally understood that he had been married to a criminal who planned to steal everything from me, and I, the senile old woman who had been invisible for 10 years, was suddenly the center of attention. "Louis," I said, taking his hand, "what's going to happen now is that you're going to have to decide what kind of man you want to be. For 10 years, you were a silent accomplice to your wife's mistreatment of me. Now you know the truth about who she really is. The question is, what are you going to do with that information?" "Mom, I want to make things right with you. I want to make amends for all the years I didn't defend you." "Making amends isn't about money, Louis. It's about respect. It's about never again allowing anyone to treat me as if I were invisible in my own home." Louis nodded. I can stay with you tonight. I don't want to be alone at home after all this." For the first time in 10 years, my son was asking something of me instead of demanding that I adapt to his wife's needs. "Of course you can stay, Louis, but tomorrow we need to talk seriously about how we are going to rebuild our relationship." As we left the hotel, I could see that the story was already appearing on local news. "Millionaire elderly woman catches thieving daughter-in-law with $3 million ring." By tomorrow, the entire city would know that Dolores, the invisible old woman, had turned out to be a woman with more power than anyone had imagined. The next day, I woke up feeling different. For the first time in 10 years, I woke up in my own house without feeling like an intruder in my own home. Louis had slept in his old room, and when I went down for breakfast, I found him in the kitchen making coffee. It was the first time in a decade that someone had made something for me in my own kitchen, instead of expecting me to serve everyone else. "Good morning, Mom," he said. And there was something different in his voice. Respect. A silent apology in every word. "Good morning, son." I sat at the table where I had had breakfast with Mario for 40 years, the table where Cynthia had made me feel like an unwelcome guest for so long. Louis placed a cup of coffee in front of me and sat on the other side. "Mom, I couldn't sleep last night. I was thinking about all the times Cynthia treated you badly, and I didn't say anything. I was remembering all the times you mentioned you couldn't find something, and I thought it was your memory." "Louis," I interrupted softly, "you don't need to punish yourself for being manipulated. Cynthia is very intelligent. She knew exactly how to present things to make it seem like she cared about my well-being while she was stealing from me. But I'm your son. I should have been on your side. I should have seen the signs." I took a sip of coffee and looked directly at him. "What matters now is what you're going to do in the future. The question is, are you going to try to save your marriage with a woman who planned to steal everything from me and declare me mentally incompetent?" Louis fell silent for a long moment. I could see the internal struggle on his face. He had been married to Cynthia for 10 years. Despite everything he had discovered, she was still his wife. At that moment, the phone rang. It was Frank. "Dolores, I have important news. The district attorney wants to meet with you this morning. Apparently, Cynthia's case is bigger than we initially thought." "Bigger how?" "They searched her house last night and found a secret room in the basement. Dolores, your daughter-in-law wasn't just stealing from you. She's been running an antique theft and resale operation that involves several wealthy families in the city." My heart raced. "What do you mean?" "They found more than 50 pieces of art and jewelry that belong neither to her nor to Louis. Apparently, she's been using her access to high society social events to identify targets and then organizing more elaborate thefts. Your house wasn't her only target. It was her base of operations." Louis turned pale.